But a lot of people covered this moment with Joe Rogan where he's like, I'm sticking with Jesus. Tim Pool covered it. I kind of covered it through Tim Pool. I think it was Doug Wilson touched on it.
And it's a doozy.
And, you know, in that moment, this would be something I would normally cover, but I kind of already have. I just didn't cover that moment. Podcasting allows us to see the shifts in culture almost before they happen. And so I could see that sort of happening with Joe. Now, I think he said this sort of sarcastically.
I can't buy that.
I'm sticking with Jesus on
Yeah.
that one. Like,
Yeah.
Jesus makes more sense.
It makes a hell of a lot more sense.
People have come back to life.
Whether or not he's being sarcastic or not, you can see the shift in his thinking even recently. It's really interesting because prior to this, as people cover Joe Rogan's spiritual formation, his spiritual quest, his spiritual journey, you would notice that Christianity seems to come up in the conversation. Maybe he's talking to a Christian. I actually saw this, if you go all the way back, probably 2 years ago on this podcast, I noticed that in Joe's conversation with Matt Walsh, he was trying to get Matt to open up about his Christianity. And Matt Walsh kind of didn't want to do that. He wanted to talk more politically. And Joe was very curious about the Christianity. You know, Matt Walsh is a Catholic, I believe. So here's the part of the Joe Rogan, Matt Walsh conversation that I was thinking of. And just so it's not too hard of a segue, their conversation is actually about same-sex marriage and how Matt, as a Catholic, as a person of faith, understands this. And you can hear Joe push Matt to give just kind of his honest, personal response, not a politically correct response, but just one from the heart as a Christian person. How do you understand this?
Is this a religious thing? Like, do you think that people who are gay should practice homosexuality? Or do you think that they should try to avoid it because biblically it's frowned upon?
I am a Christian. I'm Catholic. So if you want to talk about the biblical aspects of it, I can do that.
But what are your own personal feelings about, like, gay people? Should they avoid being gay?
You know, I believe in sexual morality. Is that the sexual act properly ordered belongs within the marital bond, which should be reserved for a man and a woman. But so that's we could talk about that part of the conversation.
Sure.
But then there's also the definitional side of it, which is what we've been talking about up to now.
So
I can explain attempt to the why the definition of marriage is important, and I can do that without saying, well, here's the Bible verse and quoting the Bible.
But obviously there has to be some religious reason why you think it's immoral for people to have gay sex.
And it was around the time that Joe interviewed Stephen C. Meyer. Now, I think Matt Walsh came before Stephen C. Meyer, so Joe was obviously curious. He was thinking about Christianity. He was getting ready to interview Stephen C. Meyer. And Matt Walsh kind of ho-hum because it's a long time ago, and you can see Joe's curiosity. So again, we've sort of, through the mystical, magical power of podcasting, can kind of predict this surprising rebirth in belief in God that Justin Brierley is also covering, and many others are covering. I think Justin's doing a good job of it. And so when Joe starts saying things like, I'm sticking with Jesus, it actually doesn't shock me. I feel like we've been talking about this for quite some time, and we know that, you know, I do believe that eventually Joe will come into contact with the person of Christ if he hasn't already, and yet the expression of Christianity that many people might see in a person like Joe Rogan will be different. And I think the church needs to be prepared for that. But here's an interesting part of a conversation where it seems like Joe isn't following the natural flow of the conversation. He brings up Christianity himself kind of out of the blue. So what does that mean? As if we look at the barometer, if we look at this as sort of a climate test, a cultural spiritual sort of test, what would it mean that Joe, who maybe was curious about Christianity, is now he was against Christianity, he was skeptical of Christianity, and then he was maybe curious of Christianity, and now he's the one bringing up Christian principles.
And like, I don't wish bad stuff upon other people. And
that's a beautiful way to live your life. It really is. I mean, that's what all Christians aspire to, is what you're doing.
Okay, so he brings this up.
yeah, I guess I'm not a Christian.
Radical forgiveness.
Yeah, and it's funny. I didn't really set out. People like point to that. They're like, forgiveness, forgiveness. You're doing forgiveness, and I was like, is this forgiveness?
She's not a Christian. She didn't bring it up. But Joe is like, what I see in you is what I see in Christians. This thing called radical forgiveness. This unconditional love is essentially what it is. If you wanted to look at sort of a biblical theme, you can trace this from the very beginning. But one of the places that you see it, and I will bring this up in the podcast moving forward, is in the Abrahamic covenant. Because what basically happens is God makes a covenant with Abraham. He takes on both parts of the contract. He splits Abraham splits the animals, and then the two parties who are entering the contract are supposed to go through the blood, but only God goes through the blood. And what God is saying in that moment is, if this contract is broken, then let what has happened to these animals happen to me. And so you have an expression right there of what is unconditional love, meaning I am going to love you and I'm going to forgive you. And it's not really going to be about anything that you have done. I'm going to take it upon myself to do this thing. If you didn't know, this is sort of random and strange, but you might see it pop up more often, is I actually have a youth ministry channel that covers the work that I did in youth ministry. And on that youth ministry channel, you will see, where's my lesson on? I did a lesson on the Abrahamic covenant in a kiddie pool. And I think it's hilarious, but I'm going to point to this illustration right now. So what you have is you have the animals. You can see the stuffy animals. And what happens is the blood, right? The blood of the covenant is right here. And Abraham's here and God's here. He's the cowboy. He's covered in blood. The blood of the covenant is on God in that moment. The smoking cauldron goes through the blood of the sacrifice, and Abraham never goes through the blood. So the judgment of breaking the covenant will never fall on Abraham. Who will it fall on? It will fall on God himself. And so there's this beautiful picture of what Joe is now speaking about. He's speaking about radical forgiveness and unconditional love. But I find it interesting that he's the one bringing it up, not his guest. So what does that mean? What does that mean about Joe Rogan's quest? And so with that little tidbit, I hope you know that I will still pay attention to Joe. I will still pay attention to Russel Brand. I actually thought Russel Brand said something very interesting recently. I will still pay attention to Jordan Peterson. But I want to point out something as well, and that is something I got a comment. And hopefully it's okay. I'm going to read some of your guys' comments. Is that Almighty Om? Because you come into the chat every once in a while. So I believe it is. I'm creating dialogue. So quoting the description of my channel, I'm creating dialogues with Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan, Russel Brand, and other powerful voices. And then he says, he or they say, I wonder if even more valuable is to create a dialogue with the people, the audience. And that is something I have tried to do. And I hope you guys see that. I haven't said that, but I do think I'm actually going to change the description of my channel to incorporate this. And essentially that would be the shift, because I do agree it is valuable to create dialogues with the audience. And that is far more transformative to society and culture. I use the argument I have with Harold Bloom. I argue that more important to our history than our genius are those that interpret those great minds for us regular people. And in some ways, that's kind of what I'm trying to do. I'm a student. I'm a layman. I'm not. But I do try to do sort of street level philosophy and theology. And I do that by staying a student and not presenting myself as some sort of expert in the realm of theology. And so I hope that that's what we're doing. Interpreting other people's conversations for the benefit of future dialogue. Well, thank you for checking out this video. I will leave links and relevant information in the description, as well as suggesting future videos that you might be interested in. So thank you for the support that you show for this channel, and I'll catch you in the next one.